hicieron en inglés con los slides. Yo creo que eso no se Many of you probably already know me, but for those of you who don't, my name is Gonza. I've been part of the startup community for about 3 years now. I studied computer engineering at my OS. I worked as a user experience product manager at Microsoft for some time, and then after that I did a hardware startup, which is when I got involved in the community. So most of this talk is actually related to my time as a user experience designer, pretty much. So when they asked me to give this talk, it was really tricky because, as it turns out, UX is a really big field. Most people think that it's maybe like UI, making things pretty, but as it turns out, UX is a huge field, right? So I had to figure out, what can I give you, right? You guys have limited resources, limited time. You don't really want to read all the theoretical books. You just want to, improve your apps, improve whatever you're working on. So what can I give you that can really help you improve? Well, for starters, I always start with this one. It's really important. UX has very little to do with making things pretty or just UI. Think of it like an iceberg, right? The very top of the iceberg is UI. Everything under the water is UX. And we only see the UI and it gets all the attention and everyone focuses on it. But there's a lot of time and effort and research that goes into building that UI. And definition, user experience refers to a person's emotions and attitudes about using a particular product, system, or service. And it's a pretty not useful definition, but I put it up because that's the definition. What really matters for you and what you're building today is it's the measure of friction between a user's goal and actually achieving it, right? So that's basically UX. And to illustrate it for you, when friction is low, right, the app is really good. The website's awesome. I did exactly what I wanted to do. When friction is high, it's a terrible service. It's a terrible app. I hate it, right? So what kinds of frictions are there? Let's cover those. First one is cognitive friction, which is friction in your brain. That's the one that you're thinking, you're reading, you're analyzing. What does this button do? What happens if I do this? That's cognitive friction. The second one is emotional friction. That's how do I feel? Is it addicting to me? Is it something I want to keep using? Am I sad from using it? And the third one is physical friction. And this one happens a lot on mobile phones, which is basically the friction of actually doing a physical action. And sometimes this happens when you're using a website and you're using the keyboard and then suddenly you have to use the mouse, or you're using the mouse and then suddenly you have to use the keyboard. That's physical friction. For the sake of this presentation, we're going to focus almost exclusively on cognitive friction because it's the one you guys actually have very direct control over, right? So, spoiler alert, I'm about to give you the whole presentation in one sentence, literally, the whole presentation. And it's summed up to Don't Make Me Think. This is a title of a very famous UX book that I'll show at the end of the story, but essentially everything that I'm going to talk about is essentially things to make the user not have to think about using your app or a product. So without further ado, here are my top 5 UX hacks, and these are things that I think all of you could just take home. Some of you have probably already seen them, some of you haven't. So number 1, optimize for the 80, not the 20. So how many here have heard about the 80-20 rule? Awesome. The 80-20 rule essentially says that for most events, 80% of the effects are caused by 20% of the actions, right? So essentially it means that the grand majority of things that happen are related to a very small amount of things. But the simpler explanation that I like using is some things in your app will be used 80% of the time and other things will be used 20% of the times. And it's really important that you define which one's 20 and which one's 80. And that's something that a lot of people have issues with. So how does that process actually look? Well, first, you list out all of your features, right? Let's say we're making a to-do list app. So one of them is adding items, and the other one is completing items, right? And maybe creating lists and forms and all the other stuff. But mostly those are the top, right? Then you prioritize them, right? In a to-do list app, what's one of the things that people are going to want to do most? What does anyone here do?
Add items.
Add items, right. So that definitely at the very top. You need to be able to add items easily. After that, you count the actions. So you've got your list, you've prioritized it, you say this is the one that happens the most. You count the actions that are time required to carry out the action. Right? So essentially what we're talking about is how many clicks, or how many taps, or how many swipes, or how many whatever does it actually take to complete that one action. And once you know how much that is, you reduce it. You figure out a way to reduce it because 3 clicks is better than 4 clicks most of the time when it comes to UX. And I have a few examples of companies that actually do this really well. Here you have obviously Facebook's sign-up page. They assume that 80% of the people who go up to the Facebook site are either going to sign up or logging in, right? So there's no need to put any other fluff on this page other than optimizing for the 80%. Dropbox, same thing. Anyone who goes to the Dropbox site either wants to sign in or download the app. They optimize downloading the app because it's smarter for their business, but it's essentially the same model. Another one that I love talking about, because this one doesn't seem obvious, is the ribbon in Microsoft Office. Something that a lot of people don't know is they actually have an internal priority list that they use to figure out which sections to actually drop out as the screen gets smaller. So this is the same exact app. As the screen gets smaller, they drop out certain areas that they think aren't the ones that people use 80% of the time. And the ones you see at the very end, when it's the smallest size, is essentially what they consider is what people do 80% of the time using the app. This is also incredibly common in mobile apps, right? Because mobile apps don't have a lot of real estate. They don't have a lot of space, so you kind of have to optimize for what the 80% is. And here you have an example of Snapchat. It optimizes the camera. It doesn't optimize anything else. It doesn't optimize adding friends. It doesn't optimize seeing what other people sent you. It's 100% taking the photo. The same with Shazam. It's listening to the song and getting you the results quickly. So in general, you want to optimize for your 80% audience because that's where most of the effort goes in, and that's where most of the people will remember about your app. So hack number 2, design peripheral vision. So essentially what this means is there are 2 types of vision that we normally use. One is central vision, which is focus right now, what I'm looking at, and the next one is peripheral vision. So for example, when you use a website, let's say Facebook, it sort of looks like this. The center area is the one that's focused, that's central vision, and the peripheral is everything that's happening around. But here's the thing. We use mostly peripheral vision to figure out where we're going to look at next, either because something popped up and called our attention, or because the structure fits what we're thinking. So I devised a little test, which usually allows you to tell whether or not the structure of your site is well designed. The test is, do you still understand the site structure when you blur it? So I'll give you guys a couple examples. Craigslist is really terrible design because when you blur it, you absolutely have no idea what's going on with this site. So it's just really bad. Google has incredible peripheral vision, right? You can very easily tell where's the list. You can actually tell which are categories or buttons, sort of, and you can easily find the search bar, even if you're not looking. Your standard slide app is usually very good peripheral vision. You know exactly where the other slides are, where the main area is, and where the tools are. Amazon obviously optimizes for this very well. What I find interesting about Amazon is even when it's super blurred, you can actually tell the difference between a regular ad and an actual item or deal for sale. So you can see the ad here in the corner. These are sites that are really, really well designed when it comes to peripheral vision and when it comes to structuring the site. So in general, you want to use basic shapes, colors, white space to make it super easy to discern sections. Remember, you don't have to give them all the information up front. You just have to give them enough information for their eyes to be like, okay, I don't want to look over here, or this doesn't look interesting, let me look down here. That's essentially all you want to give them. That leads me to hack number 3, which enables this a lot easier, is use a grid. I absolutely love grids. Grids give you a visual structure and reduce cognitive friction by a lot. And by grid, I just mean literally aligning things so that they align side by side. For example, look at an app like this. This is a real one, by the way. You can download this. This app would do a lot better. Like, there's a lot of things wrong here, okay? But this app would do a lot better if it actually had a grid or a structure, or things were aligned and buttons didn't feel like they were just randomly placed. Here's another website. This is an actual screenshot I took a couple minutes ago. So obviously this site wants to sell you a lot of stuff, but the fact that it's missing a grid means you can hardly find anything on the site. When you compare this to McMaster, which is a very famous mechanical engineering site that has a lot of parts, a ridiculous amount of parts, look how strict they are to their grid. It's actually, I find it fascinating how well designed this grid is. Where it aligns literally edges of the square aligned to the top, it's spectacular. And what's really amazing is you're almost seeing the same amount of items here as you are here. The only difference is this one's a lot easier to look at and a lot easier to find what you're looking for. And the good news about all this is, if you're a web developer, you kind of get this one for free because most most frameworks come with a grid, right? So this is a website built on Bootstrap Grid. And essentially you can see the grid, the alignment, the center, everything aligns perfectly. So grids allow us to scan easier, and it uses up less brain power. Hack number 4, be religiously consistent and use affordances. Okay? So what does that mean? It means that you don't need to reinvent the wheel every single time for people to use your app. And an interface is kind of like a joke, right? If you have to explain it, it's probably a really crappy interface. And there are a lot of affordances to pick from. Some are biological affordances, which you get for free. You get it just because they're human, they're going to react to it. So for example, this one, right? Most of you, and I was looking at the eyes, most of you looked at the tiger as one of the first things. That's a biological affordance. We see the tiger, it's dangerous, we look right at the eyes. Another example of a biological affordance is colors. Right? It's not the same thing seeing a green error message as it is seeing a red error message. The red one just looks a lot worse, right? A lot more intense. An affordance that commonly causes problems is this one. Does anyone know why these doors cause so many issues?
It can be used other way.
It's used other way, but the real affordance that's being used against you here is the bars. Those bars were used to pulling everything that looks like that. So it's really idiotic to put a push on it. A more intelligent design would be like this, right? There's no way to mess this one up. You know exactly which one to pull and which one to push. So sometimes you don't have biological affordances. You need to pick established ones. The mobile ecosystem is one of the best examples of established affordances. The way apps are developed for iOS, when it comes to their structure, the way they're developed for Android, and the way they're developed for Windows Phone are completely different, and you should take that into consideration because that's the phone, that's the app, that's the structure I use every single day. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people that will have conflict with this one where you want to make your experience equal across the board, but as it turns out, that's not very effective. And if you can't establish an affordance, then train the user to see your own, right? So an example is Treehouse. They use colors to basically denote what kind of course there is. So it's a really great example of where they slowly train the user to such a level where it gets to a point where every time you see orange on that site, you know it has to do with design. So it's a really great affordance. Another big company that does it is Adobe, right? They do affordances for their products individually. So Dreamweaver, most of the stuff is green. Photoshop, most of the stuff is blue. And that way, when you see those colors, you kind of click. And finally, the last hack is keep them updated. I find this one really fascinating because it really messes with your brain. Okay? You have about 200 milliseconds to basically react to me. Otherwise, I'm going to think you're lagging. That's about the time you have to give a response to a user whenever they do any action. So that means that a lot in today's world, right? You can't always guarantee 200 milliseconds. So you end up with a lot of loading screens all over the place, loading here, loading there, all the time. But here's the issue. There are minor tricks you can do to a loading screen to really make it feel like it got went by fast. So I have an example here, and it doesn't load very good in PowerPoint, so I'm going to quickly show it to you. Look at this example. Right. And this one. So you know what's interesting? I showed both of those exactly the same amount of time. But the one that was moving faster felt a lot faster visually, and you felt like it just wasn't even there that long. Examples of big companies doing this is, right, when you log into Slack, they give you a little message. The fact that you stop and read that message makes the loading feel that much faster. And it's just a stupid little message. Google, even for email, has a bar that pretty much flashes across your face like for maybe 2-3 seconds. But the fact that you see the bar makes you feel like Gmail is the fastest thing in the world, even though it took 3 seconds to get you to your screen. So simply telling the user what's going on cuts down perceived time by a lot. Simply giving a little update, a little like interesting animation, anything, it just cuts it down dramatically. So I'm running out of time from the top, because I know you guys probably already forgot about these, so let's go over them again. Number 1, optimize for the 80, not the 20, right? Optimize for the features and things that users do use the most, and prioritize those. Number 2, design for peripheral vision. Remember that people use that vision to figure out which areas of the site or app they want to look at. 3, use a grid, because it enables all the other ones. 4, be consistent and use affordances wherever you can, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. If links are blue, keep them blue. It's just better. And 5, keep them informed. Oh, I was supposed to say then, not then. So keep them informed because time is just perceived a lot faster. And if you guys want to learn a little bit more about UX, I can highly recommend these books. Obviously, there's a Don't Make Me Think one that I mentioned. Universal Principles of Design isn't so much about UX, but it's just a really fun bathroom book or just waiting time book. Each page is an individual, interesting little brain hack. It's very cool. And then 100 Things Every Designer Should Know About People is also really good. And here are a couple websites that you can look through, which are great for learning UX. So,